we will now talk about the bigger picture based on the results of the Kairos and the different surveys of COTRI, China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. We will look at two major questions, namely, what are the characteristics of the demand structure of different segments of the Chinese international tourism source market, and what are the opportunities and challenges for European small and medium-sized enterprises, and, needless to say, many of this is also true for non-European companies as well. So just quickly look at the big picture. We see that China is, since 2012, the biggest international tourism outbound source market. These are the numbers COTRI are calculating based on the host country statistics. We can also see that development from 2015 to 2016 is only from 133 to 137 million border crossings. That does not sound a lot and represents less than 3% year-on-year growth rate. That's shocking, but don't worry. If you look carefully, we can see that trips to what we call the rest of the world, going beyond Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan, still grew by about 12%. What has been happening in the last 2 years is that trips to Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan fell by about 5%, and so therefore we can see that last year was the first time that less than half the Chinese travellers were visiting only Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan, and more than half were travelling further. This, of course, is very good news from the European perspective. This is represented also if you look here at the columns. The blue is the rest of the world, including Europe. The red is Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan. You can see that the blue ones are still growing nicely and the red ones are coming down a bit. Our forecast for 2017 is that probably Greater China will be at about zero level, not shrinking anymore, but also not growing, whereas the rest of the world will still grow by over 10% in 2017. What does this mean in absolute numbers? There were in 2016 66.7 million trips to Greater China and 70.1 trips to the rest of the world. The bigger part of this, travellers are staying in the neighbouring destinations in Asia, but of course there are also those coming to us in Europe. The heroes last year in Asia have been Nepal and Vietnam, both with more than 50% growth in 2016. But that comes after they had been going down the year before. And you can see this is more exotic locations from our point of view, like Chile, Egypt, South Africa, Philippines, Mexico. They have all been growing at more than 30%. Looking to Europe, we see especially those destinations which attract individual travellers had healthy growth rates. Of course, starting from smaller absolute growth rates, Iceland, for example, had 70,000 arrivals last year after they had 17,000 arrivals only 3 years ago. And also places like Poland and Serbia and other Eastern European countries have had very substantial growth. For the major destinations, we had the sad terrorist events occurring. Also, the Chinese media rather exaggerated the news about the problems which were allegedly created by refugees coming to Europe. And as Chinese still have many other places to travel, many of them postponed their trips to Western Europe and went somewhere else. Accordingly, if you look at the numbers for Spain, Italy and France and Switzerland, you can see they all had more than 10% losses. Countries where the majority of visitors are business travellers, like Germany, fared a bit better. Globally, the biggest loser has clearly been Turkey, where almost 50% fewer arrivals were reported in 2016 when compared to 2015. We are talking about an outbound market which is maturing and which is segmenting further and further, but we still have Chinese from so-called smaller second and third tier cities who still do their first trips to Europe in a package tour group and still rush around with their main interest to be able to say afterwards, "I've been there." However, for the more experienced travellers, this is no longer what they can brag about. They rather want to travel in small groups with their friends, colleagues or family, and they have different interests and needs. We call them the second wave of Chinese travellers, being on average a bit younger, more independent, and many of them have studied overseas or are working for international companies. This kind of self-organised travel is much easier than it used to be because it's now very easy to obtain a passport and hard currency, and many countries now offer multiple entry visas. Also here in Europe, in the Schengen area, we have been moving forward in this direction successfully. So therefore we see there is segmentation, even at the level of age. So we've been talking about, if you're familiar with the market, about the Ballinghos and Julinghos, people born in the 1980s and people born in the 1990s. But we have already seen the Linglingos, people born after 2000, becoming more and more important. And this actually is a word I made up, so please excuse me, the Linglinquians, the people born before 1960. So the older people, or the best agers, let's say, are now entering the market. We can see that there have been some studies by Juni and C-Trip that the people below 18 and those above 55 have been by far the fastest growing market segments. We see people not only interested in different activities or different interests in sunshine, is more or less depending on where in China they live and also the different age groups that are coming. So again, this is all about niches, but niches are very big in China.